Iran has warned the European Union of reciprocal measures if the bloc decides to list the Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist entity. Iranian media reports say that this is the message the country's foreign minister relayed to EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell. Hossein Amir Abdollahian said, I'm quoting here, "We have repeatedly said that the Revolutionary Guards are a formal and sovereign organization whose role is central for guaranteeing Iran's security. Steps taken by the European Parliament to list the organization as a terrorist entity are in a way a shot in the foot of Europe itself." The foreign minister added that it is important for both parties to respect mutual security in the world of diplomacy instead of using a language of threats and unfriendly actions. The development comes after the EU Parliament on Wednesday called on the bloc to list IRG as a terror group. They blame it for the repression of protesters as well as claims of Tehran supplying drones to Moscow. Massive anti-state protests broke out in Iran last September after the death of Mahsa Amini. She was detained for not wearing her hijab properly, a violation of Iran's moral dress code. As Tehran uses fear and violence to clamp down on agitation, the European Parliament also condemned the crackdown on protesters by Iran's security forces. They've even slammed the IRG for its role, calling its actions brutal. For more on this, we're now being joined by Mr. Fuad Izadi. He's an associate professor at University of Tehran. Professor, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast.
Sure. Thank you.
Now, my first question to you: Iran has warned the European Union of reciprocal measures if it lists the IRGC as a terrorist entity. How do you assess this?
Well, what will happen if they go through with this proposal, Iran will do the same to European ships, European military personnel in the region. They will be considered terrorist organizations. That's only fair. And what will happen is that we remember what Iran did to ISIS in Iraq, in Syria. Both the Syrian government and the Iraqi government fought a terrorist organization, ISIS, with the help of Iran. Iran's military is quite capable. The technology is indigenous. You reported that Iran has supplied drones to Russia. Russia is a major weapons manufacturing country. If they need Iranian drones, as some news outlets have reported, that shows that Iran's military is quite capable of defending itself. And if Europeans are considered, European military personnel are considered terrorists, and Iran has been in the business of fighting terrorists, then you may have a war on your hand. And who's going to be responsible for that war? The Europeans will. It's unfortunate that the Europeans have forgotten that we don't live in the 19th century. The period of colonialization is long past, and they need to realize the realities of today's world.
Right, absolutely. Now, just for more clarity on this, the US designated the Revolutionary Guards as a foreign terrorist group in 2019. British press reports have suggested that London is considering a similar move here. In fact, Britain has vowed more reprisals against Iran after it executed the UK Iranian national. What are Iran's options in face of all of these challenges?
You know, we have been witnessing for the last 3-4 months a heightened version of Iranian demonization. When you demonize a country at this level, generally you end up with a military confrontation. The Europeans, the Americans, the Westerners may be moving towards a war with Iran, and history has shown that before they engage in military confrontation, they need to demonize whoever the enemy is. And this is quite dangerous. I think the cooler heads in Europe need to realize that this level of propaganda is not going to be useful. You know, they failed to overthrow the Iranian government. The aim of the hysteria in the last 4 months was to overthrow the Iranian government. They failed to do that, and resorting to name-calling and calling the other side terrorist and engaging in this type of rhetoric is childish, and Europeans should know better.
Right, absolutely. Another perhaps important question here would be, why do the Western powers perceive IRGC as such an organization that it wants is that of a nefarious activity here?
IRGC is not an organization. IRGC is Iran's military. And Iran is a sovereign country. Iran is actually the oldest country on the face of the earth. Iran is an ancient country. And you don't call Iran's military a terrorist organization. You can do that, Europeans may end up doing that, but it's going to be a major mistake. And when you engage in this type of rhetoric, you may satisfy yourself. You failed to overthrow the Iranian government. You wanted to repeat the 1953 coup. You didn't manage to do that. You start calling Iran's military a terrorist organization. That may satisfy some egos in some European capital, but it's not going to advance European interest in this part of the world. Europe depends on energy resources in the Middle East, and if they want to make sure that their dependence on energy resources in the Middle East is secured, they should not be calling Iran's military a terrorist organization. They made a similar mistake by confronting Russia. Now they're confronting Iran. That's not very smart. I'm surprised to see this level of difficulty that Europeans have with their foreign policy. Unfortunately, Europe's foreign policy seems to be hijacked by the Israelis and the Israeli lobby, the same way the American foreign policy is under the direction of the Israeli lobby for many decades now. So this is a huge mistake for Europe.
All right. Professor Izadi, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast with all your insights on this.
Thank you.
WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.